the unexpected cry in the night. The snow came down without mercy that January night, burying Seoul's back alleys in a silence so total it felt manufactured. Inside the penthouse at the top of the Jeon Tower, 42 floors above a city that feared his name, Jeon Siwon stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched and stared at nothing in particular. At 36, Siwon looked like the kind of man who had made peace with being dangerous. He had his father's sharp jaw and his mother's still, unreadable eyes, dark irises that gave away nothing. He wore no suit at this hour, just a black shirt with the top buttons open and a dragon tattoo curling up the left side of his neck, the ink faded just enough at the edges to prove it had been earned in another life. His organization, the Jeon Syndicate, though no one called it that to his face, controlled logistics, real estate, and quietly, a third of the black market pharmaceutical supply chain between Busan and Beijing. He had everything that mattered to men like him. And so, in the particular loneliness that comes with having everything, he stood at his window and watched snow fall. The sound reached him at 2:17 a.m. Small. Thin. Impossibly fragile, a sound like a question mark made of breath. He turned from the window and stood very still, the way a man stands when his instincts are calculating before his mind catches up. Then it came again, a cry. High and reedy and unmistakably infant. His penthouse door had a fingerprint scanner, a camera, and 2 guards posted at the elevator landing. Nothing came to his floor uninvited. Nothing. He crossed the room in 4 strides, moved his hand beneath the credenza near the door where a loaded Glock sat in a magnetic holster, and held it at his side as he opened the door. The hallway was empty. Except for a Moses basket, woven in plain, set directly in front of his door with the deliberateness of a declaration. Inside it, wrapped in a cream muslin cloth printed with small golden suns, was a baby. The child's eyes were closed. Its tiny fists were curled beside its jaw. Its skin was a deep, warm brown, the shade of polished mahogany, and its cheeks were flushed from crying, though the crying had stopped the moment he opened the door, as though the child had been waiting for exactly him. Beneath the basket, held in place by its corner against the cold floor tile, was an envelope. Siwon looked down the hallway both ways. Nothing. He looked at the ceiling camera, he'd checked the footage, but something already told him it would show a blacked-out feed, a 2-minute gap, the kind of gap that only people with specific knowledge of his systems could engineer. He put the gun back in its holster, crouched, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single card. Cream stock. No printed address. Handwritten in precise English letters, not Korean, in blue ink. Her name is Era. She is yours. She carries the debt of what happened in Atlanta, November 14th. Keep her safe. They already know she exists. I'm sorry I had no other choice. Siwon read it once. Then again. Then a third time, though by the second read the words had stopped being letters and started being something older and more damaging, memory. Atlanta. November 14th. He picked up the basket, careful, tentative, like a man handling something explosive, and carried it inside. He had been in Atlanta for 72 hours and he wasn't supposed to be there at all. It was November. 14 months ago. He'd flown in under a false name to meet a mid-level American broker who was funneling fentanyl precursors through a pharmaceutical shell company based in Gwinnett County. The meeting had gone wrong, the broker was 3 hours late, then came with 2 men Siwon hadn't been told about, and the whole thing smelled like a setup. He'd walked out before it escalated, slipped 2 of his men the signal to disperse, and found himself alone on a rainy Tuesday night in an Atlanta neighborhood he didn't know, without a car, with a phone he'd already wiped. He had walked 6 blocks before ducking into a bar called Indigo, low lighting, jazz from the back, the kind of place that didn't look at you too hard. He'd ordered water and then bourbon and sat in the corner booth and waited for his contact to call him back with an extraction plan. She had been sitting 2 booths over, alone, with a glass of red wine and a book she wasn't reading. He noticed her because of the way she sat, straight-backed, watchful, like someone performing casualness without quite believing in it. She was black, tall even seated, with close-cropped natural hair and a jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone with opinions. She wore a dark green coat still damp from the rain. When their eyes met she didn't look away. Neither did he. Her name, she told him an hour later, when the bourbon had made the booth feel smaller and warmer, was Naomi. He told her his name was Simon. Close enough to be instinctive. Far enough to be a lie. They talked for 3 hours. He couldn't explain it then and couldn't explain it now. She was a researcher, she said. Molecular biology. She was in Atlanta at a conference and was leaving the next morning and didn't see the point of pretending she wanted to be alone at a bar at 11 p.m. She had a way of looking at him that felt like being read, not the surface of him, not the suit or the calm or the careful hands, but the architecture underneath. She seemed to see the men his mother used to know, before everything. They left together. He was gone before she woke up. He had to be. He'd already broken 3 of his own rules that night, and he didn't intend to break a 4th by allowing himself to want more. He left nothing behind, no note, no number. He was very good at disappearing. He had not thought about it as a mistake. He had tried not to think about it at all. Naomi. N. He sat now on the floor of his living room, Jeon Siwon, architect of terror for 3 criminal networks across 2 continents, with a baby girl asleep against his chest, her tiny ear pressed to his heartbeat, and understood that some nights follow you home no matter how far you run. By morning, his inner circle knew. Jeon Siwon's family, the real family, the one with blood claims and board seats and opinions delivered with the weight of knives, arrived at the penthouse by 10 o'clock. His uncle, John Mansik, who ran the financial side of the syndicate from a spotless office in Gangnam-gu, came first. Then his older cousin Haran, who handled public relations and political relationships and wore her cruelty in the form of excellent manners. Then Chairman John himself, Siwon's father, 71 years old, walking with a cane now but still carrying the particular stillness of a man who had ordered deaths without raising his voice. They stood in the living room looking at the baby in the portable crib Siwon's housekeeper had produced from somewhere. Era slept through all of it, fists curled, indifferent to the judgment of powerful people. Siwon stood by the window. "Get rid of it," his father said. "Not cruel, factual. By tomorrow." "Her," Siwon said. His father looked at him the way he always looked at him when he said something that wasted time. "The child is a liability. We don't know who the mother is, we don't know who delivered it, and we don't know who knows about it. Every hour you keep it here is an hour our enemies are calculating how to use it against us." "She's mine," Siwon said. The room shifted. His uncle Mansik exhaled slowly through his nose. Haran stopped examining her nails. His father's expression didn't change, which meant it had, underneath, in the geography of the man's face that only the family could read. "You don't know that," his father said. "I know. Even if you do. She stays." His voice was quiet. That was the thing about Siwon that his family had always found most unnerving. The quieter he got, the more immovable. He hadn't raised his voice to anyone in 5 years. He hadn't needed to. "If any of you move to remove her while I'm finding out what's happening, I'll consider it an act of betrayal. And you know what I do with those." Haran smiled with half her mouth. "You're being sentimental." "I'm being precise." He looked at his father. "She is mine, and someone left her here as a warning, or a plea, or both. Until I understand which, she is under my protection. That is final." His father studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, not agreement, but the particular nod of a man who has decided the argument is over for today, and that tomorrow is another conversation. He turned and left without another word. Mansik and Haran followed. The door closed. The apartment was quiet again. Siwon went and stood over the crib and looked at his daughter sleeping, and felt something he hadn't felt in years that he had no name for yet. The hidden message deepens. He read the note 47 times over 2 days. Then he had his best analyst, Park Ji-hoon, a 29-year-old former intelligence operative who was loyal the way sharp objects are loyal, through pure utility, examine it under UV light and chemical reagent. What they found was invisible to the naked eye, a second layer of writing, pressed into the back of the card in a heat-sensitive ink that only appeared at body temperature. Naomi had written it with her thumb, Ji-hoon theorized, pressed into the card while she still held it warm. 3 characters. A location abbreviation he recognized, not in Atlanta. In Incheon. And below it, a 14-digit number. The number corresponded, after 40 minutes of cross-referencing, to a safety deposit box at a private banking institution near Incheon International Airport, one of 16 institutions the Jeon Syndicate used for clean asset storage. The number format was internal. Proprietary. Known to less than a dozen people. Siwon drove there himself, alone, which he hadn't done in years. Inside the box, opened with a code he hadn't shared with anyone, was a USB drive. On the drive, a single encrypted folder. Inside the folder, once decrypted with a key he had to reconstruct from a combination of his mother's birthday and the date of his first conviction, details no one living could have known he'd use 7 documents and a video file. He sat in his car in the parking garage and watched the video first. Naomi appeared on screen, alive, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, speaking quietly and directly into the camera with the focused calm of a woman who has rehearsed this because she knows there may not be a second take. Siwon. Or whatever your real name is. I know who you are now. I knew within 2 weeks of Atlanta. I'm not telling you this to scare you, I'm telling you so you understand I made a choice with full information. I chose to have her. I chose not to involve you. And then something happened that made it so I had no choice but to involve you after all. The people who are coming for her are not rivals of yours. They're older than that. If you go through the documents I left, you'll start to understand. I can't tell you more here. There are eyes I don't know about yet. Her full name is Era Naomi Jeon. She has your stubbornness. She also has my stubbornness. God help whoever crosses her one day. Keep her safe. Please. The video ended. Siwon sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes without moving. Then he opened the documents. What he read over the next hour dismantled every assumption he'd had about the past 14 months, rearranged them on the floor of his understanding like shards of something broken, and showed him a shape he'd never considered. Someone had engineered the Atlanta meeting to fail. Not to rob him or expose him. To put him in that bar on that night, at exactly that hour, alone. It had been a setup. But not for him. For Naomi. The first threat came wrapped in flowers. A white orchid arrangement was delivered to the tower lobby on the 4th morning after Era's arrival. The deliveryman had no origin address. Tucked inside the blooms was a card, "We would like to meet the child. We will be in touch." No signature. Siwon recognized the orchid variety, Vanda coeruleum, blue-tinged, cultivated almost exclusively in a single greenhouse operation outside Taipei. He knew who owned that greenhouse. He had done business with them once, 7 years ago, and ended the relationship when he realized what they traded alongside the real estate and shipping: people. Specifically, people with rare genetic markers that their research division had cataloged and tracked. Quietly. Patiently. Across decades. The Chien Group. Naomi's documents had named them. She had been researching them for 3 years, not as a molecular biologist at a university conference, but as something else entirely. The documents made that clear. She had stumbled onto what they were looking for. And then, through the strangest accident of fate, she had carried it to term and named her Era. Within 48 hours of the orchid delivery, 2 of Siwon's peripheral security contacts went silent. A surveillance post he maintained outside the city stopped reporting. Then, on the 6th night, a car with no plates made 3 slow passes around the tower. He moved Era that same evening. New location. 8 guards. Nobody outside the innermost circle knew where. Then someone leaked the new address before dawn. Siwon stood in the middle of an apartment that had just been compromised and understood something he hadn't wanted to understand: the breach was internal. The leak had come from inside his own walls. He picked Era up from the crib. She made a sound of mild complaint at being woken, grabbed his collar, and closed her eyes again, and felt, for the first time in his life, what it is to be afraid not for yourself but for something you are holding. Naomi Carter was 32 years old, born in Atlanta, Georgia, and she was not a molecular biologist. She had that degree, it was real. She had used it to gain employment as a senior researcher at a Chien-affiliated biotech firm in 2021, knowing full well who funded it, because she was investigating them. She had been investigating them, Siwon now understood, on behalf of a coalition of international forensic scientists and human rights researchers who had documented the Chien Group's 30-year program of sourcing and cataloging genetic material from unwilling or unknowing participants across Asia and the African diaspora, people with rare hereditary traits that Chien's biological research division was turning, quietly, into proprietary medical patents worth billions. Naomi's own bloodline, traced through her grandmother's family in Louisiana, carried one such trait. A mitochondrial variant that affected cellular regeneration in ways that current science was only beginning to map. Chien had identified her years before she identified them. The Atlanta conference had been a trap, set for her, not for Siwon. They had intended to approach her there. Recruit her, or threaten her, or take a blood sample through means she had no say in. She had sensed it and bolted from the conference hotel. Found indigo. Found a booth in the corner. Found a man with still dark eyes who told her his name was Simon. She had not known he was a crime lord. She had known he was dangerous, you don't get eyes like his by living gently. But she'd also known she was safe with him, which was strange and true simultaneously. She had told him more truth than she intended. She had felt, in the warm corner of that booth with the jazz bleeding through the walls, that for one night she could stop running. She found out who he was 2 weeks later. Ran a search on the description she'd memorized, the tattoo she'd studied, the cadence of his Korean accented English. Took 3 weeks and a contact who owed her a favor in Interpol. Jeon Siwon. Architect. Ghost. The man the Seoul underworld called Wang, Dragon King. She had been afraid. Then she had found out she was pregnant. Then she had weighed her options with the same cold precision she brought to everything, and decided she would have Era. She would not tell him. He could not know, for his sake and hers and the child's. The last thing a child of her research needed was to grow up inside a criminal empire with a target on its back. But then Chien found her anyway. And the note, and Era, and the Moses basket became the only move she had left. She had not been hiding from him. She had been protecting all three of them from something older and better resourced than either of them alone. Siwon read the last of the documents at 3 a.m. and sat in the dark with Era asleep in a carrier on his chest, and thought about the woman in the green coat who had looked at him like she was reading the men beneath the architecture, and understood that she had seen something worth protecting. In him. Despite everything she'd later found out. He needed to find her. He needed to find her alive. The leak was Heron. He didn't want it to be. He'd run the forensics twice, had Jihoon run them a third time independently, and both times the trail came back to the same place, a secure message, routed through an intermediary server, sent from a device registered to the shell company Heron used for her discretionary accounts, timed 4 hours after he'd moved Era to the new location. The message had contained the address. Nothing more. He went to her apartment himself. She was sitting at her dining table as though she'd been expecting him, in a white silk blouse with a glass of plum wine and her hands folded and her composure immaculate the way it always was, that was Heron, all surface and edge. "How long?" he said. She took a breath. 3 years. He sat across from her. The apartment was quiet. "Tell me." She told him. Not everything, he could see the places where she chose her words carefully, building a version of truth that served her, but enough. The Chien Group had approached her during a Hong Kong business trip. They knew about the syndicate's financial vulnerabilities, the places where the accounts were soft, and they had offered protection from a regulatory investigation that would have dismantled the Jeon financial infrastructure. In exchange, intelligence. Access points. Nothing that would harm Siwon directly, she said. Just information. "The baby," he said. Heron looked at her wine. "I didn't know about the baby. I didn't know what they wanted with her. I thought," she stopped. "You thought they wanted to use her as leverage over me. To control me." She said nothing. Which was its own kind of answer. Heron. His voice was very quiet. "They don't want leverage. They want her biology." Something crossed her face then. Something she hadn't calculated. Genuine horror, perhaps, because whatever she'd signed herself up for, it hadn't included a child being treated as a harvest. "I didn't know," she said again, and this time it was smaller. "I know you didn't." He stood. "That's the only reason you're still sitting there." He looked at her for a long moment, this woman he'd grown up beside, who had taught him his first card game and attended his mother's funeral and built a career of razor-wire loyalty to this family. "I need to know everything Chien told you. Every contact. Every drop. Every piece of information you shared." He placed a phone on the table. "Start now. If you help me end this, I will consider the debt repaid. If you don't." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. By morning, she had given him everything. The betrayal opened something old and structural in him, a crack in the foundation he'd built his entire life on, the belief that the family was the one fixed point. He understood now what Naomi had understood from the outside: sometimes the danger isn't beyond the walls. Sometimes it is the walls. The offer arrived through a clean intermediary at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. The Chien Group, through their representative, a man named Wen who wore European suits and had the practiced warmth of a funeral director, proposed a straightforward arrangement. They would cease all activities against the Jeon syndicate. They would return an asset they'd been holding, a woman, American, currently in their custody in a facility outside Shanghai. In exchange, they required access to the child. Not permanent. A series of visits. Medical. Non-invasive. A sampling protocol. One, to his credit, delivered this with no visible guilt. He was explaining a business arrangement. He genuinely didn't understand why anyone would find it complicated. Siwon listened. He didn't move. He let Wen finish. Then he asked 3 questions. The woman, was she alive and unharmed? One said yes. Could he verify independently? One said he would arrange a video call. Was the sampling protocol what they claimed, or was there more? Wen's slight pause on the 3rd question told him what he needed to know. He thought about his empire. The years. The bodies and the blood and the machine he'd built, imperfect, brutal, vast. He thought about his father and his uncle and the organization that bore his family's name and had been the shape of his entire life. He thought about what saying no would cost him: war, exposure, the possibility of dismantlement. Then he thought about Era. He thought about her fists, curled beside her jaw. He thought about her ear pressed against his heartbeat. He thought about Naomi in the green coat, choosing to protect him even in her absence, engineering the only possible escape route she could find and trusting him, a man she'd spent one night with, a man who ran a criminal empire, to be the kind of person worth trusting. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be on the other side of this moment. No, he told Wen. Wen blinked. You understand what you're. I understand everything. Siwon stood. Tell your people I'm coming. Tell them they have 24 hours to release the woman and stand down, or I will bring every resource I have, legal, illegal, and several the law hasn't classified yet, against everything they've built. I know about the Taipei greenhouse. The patent vaults. The genetic registry. I have documentation. He let that land. Your founders spent 30 years building something they thought was invisible. They were wrong. Go. Wen went. Siwon sat back down. Across the room, in a crib by the window with afternoon light cutting gold bars across the floor, Era was awake and studying her own hand with the deep philosophical gravity of someone encountering a hand for the first time. She turned her head, found him watching, and, for the very first time, smiled. Wide and gummy and unambiguous and directed entirely at him. He had not cried in 11 years. He didn't now, but only barely. The war lasted 18 days. He didn't win it cleanly, no wars are won cleanly, and he was honest enough with himself to know that. 2 of his men were killed. He lost 3 financial assets and a property portfolio he'd spent 4 years cultivating. The Qian Group's operation didn't collapse entirely, organizations like that are hydra-headed, and he'd cut some but not all. But the genetic registry was exposed, handed to a network of international journalists and human rights lawyers that Naomi's research coalition had spent years cultivating, waiting for exactly the kind of evidence he now provided. The story broke in 5 languages simultaneously. The Qian founders became the subject of a joint Interpol and South Korean financial crimes investigation. Their funding dried up overnight. Naomi came home in the 3rd week, brought out of Shanghai by people Siwon trusted more than most governments. She arrived at the Incheon facility where he was keeping Era, no longer his penthouse, somewhere smaller and quieter and harder to find, at 2 in the morning. She looked thinner. More careful with her movements. But her eyes were the same, that particular look that read the men beneath the architecture. She stood in the doorway of the room where Era was sleeping and held her own elbows and didn't say anything for a long time. He stood a few feet behind her, giving her the space to have it. You kept her, she finally said. She's mine, he said. And she's yours. That seemed like enough reason. Naomi turned and looked at him. Not the way people look at Jeon Siwon, not with calculation or fear or performance. The way she'd looked at him in the booth at Indigo. Like he was simply a person, and the question was only whether he was a good one. I owe you an explanation, she said. Several, actually. I know the main ones, he said. The rest we have time for. He stepped back from several things in the months that followed, not everything. He wasn't naive about what he was or what the syndicate required of him, but enough. He dismantled the pharmaceutical supply chain voluntarily, absorbed the financial loss, and redirected those assets. His father called it weakness. His uncle said he'd lost his edge. Heron, who was working off her debt in the unglamorous work of financial reconstruction, said nothing about it, which he found was the most honest response. He learned to make formula at 3 in the morning. He learned the specific pitch of Era's different cries, hunger versus tired versus indignant, and found that the last one sounded like a complaint directed specifically at him, which he respected enormously. He hired a rotation of trusted caregivers but was specific about which moments he handled himself, the 2 a.m. feeding, the bath, the slow walk around the apartment in the dark when she couldn't settle, her cheek against his shoulder. He was not a reformed man. He was not a saved man. He was a man who had found, in the most improbable possible geometry, a bar in Atlanta, a note under a door, a child in a basket, something to be more careful about losing than everything he'd already built. On a night in spring, when the cherry blossoms were doing what Seoul's cherry blossoms do, burning bright for a week and then releasing everything in a single pink storm, Naomi found the second note. Not the one from the Moses basket. A different one, tucked inside the USB drive's inner casing, behind the drive itself. She'd only found it because the casing cracked and she was wrapping it for disposal. It was written in Naomi's own hand. But the ink was different. The date was older. And the message, 3 lines, addressed to no one, didn't refer to the Chien group at all. It referred to a name. A location. A bloodline other than Era's. She brought it to Siwon. He read it in the kitchen at 9 in the evening while the city hummed below them, with Era asleep in the next room and spring blossoms drifting past the glass like slow confetti. He read it twice. His face, as always, gave nothing away. Then he looked up at Naomi and said, very quietly, "Era isn't the only one." Naomi held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I've known for 6 weeks. I didn't want to tell you until you'd had time to breathe." He looked at the note again. Then at the window. Then somewhere past both. Outside, the blossoms fell. Somewhere in this city, or in another, or in a country neither of them had thought to look yet, there was another child. Another piece of whatever Chien had been building. Another thread in a larger design that the 18 days of war had not, after all, unraveled. The story, as it turned out, was not over. It had only just found its footing. And Jeon Siwon, Dragon King, Empire Builder, man who had learned to make formula at 3 in the morning, closed his hand around the note and understood that whatever came next, he was a different instrument for it. Not weaker. Changed. Which, in the end, is the only way anything ever truly wins. Like and subscribe for more wonderful stories like this.